Hey, Frog fans, welcome in to another episode of the Indy Drill. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the Indy Drill, it's just me. Get out now if you need to. But I would suggest you stay because we've got a lot to talk about on this episode. I am Jamie Plunkett. I am your host, co-host of Frogs Insider alongside Melissa Treebwasser. As I've already stated, she is not here. This is the Indy Drill. This is just me talking about kind of a wide angle lens of some of the other stuff that's going on in college athletics. Tonight we're talking about the SCORE Act. There's some progress being made with the Congressional Black Caucus. The SCORE Act also has a new challenger in the Senate, a new bill that we're going to talk about as well called the SAFE Act. Let's see, we've got a new snitch line in college athletics. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about some new Big 12 partnerships with New Era and Rally House. The coaching carousel is up and running at full steam already, and we've just reached October 1st by the time you're listening to this. And Blueprint Sports is a third-party NIL organization. We're going to talk about what that is, why they are in the news this week, and the concept of third-party NIL organizations in this new settlement era. All that, plus a couple Twitter questions, and some Week 6 picks along the way. So I hope you'll stick around and join me for that. Before we jump into all of that, though, this is the Indy Drill. It is just me, Jamie, here talking to you, the listener, in your ears, wherever you get your podcasts, or maybe even on the YouTube channel. And on that subject, if you are listening on a podcast, that's great. Thank you so much for doing that. Leave a rating and a review, please. Go in there, whether it's 1 star or 5 stars. I hope it's the latter. Leave a rating. Type in a comment on this episode. Type in SAFE, because we're going to be talking about the SAFE Act, or SCORE, because we're going to be talking about the SCORE Act as well. SAFE or SCORE, those are your two things to comment this week on the episode. Leave us a rating and a review. That really does help us out a tremendous amount, and there have been a ton of you doing that, so we're very, very thankful for that. If you go over to the YouTube channel at Frogs Insider, you'll see a lot of great content this week. You'll see the video version of this show. You'll see the video version of Melissa and I's big show from Sunday night / Monday morning, where we break down the loss to Arizona State. You'll see the live post-game show with Steven Johnson from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram and myself breaking down the action from TCU's loss to ASU right after the fact. If you don't want to relive all of those things, you can also go and watch Sonny Dykes' press conference from this week, where he starts to talk about the preparations for Colorado coming up on Saturday night. We also talked to Cade Bennett. We talked to Paul Oyewale. He does a great job of talking about all of the stuff that we would expect from a midweek press conference. And Paul also goes into his baptism a little bit, which is a pretty cool story. You can find that on the Frogs Insider YouTube channel. You can also find media interviews with Kirk Saarloos, TCU's baseball coach, Tommy Lepore, and Sawyer Strohsnyder, two all-American TCU baseball players, because fall camp for baseball started this week. And we got some content up around the baseball team as well. Lots of stuff going on over the Frogs Insider YouTube channel. Make sure you check it out. Subscribe over there. Turn on notifications, because we post a new video pretty much every day at this point, if not a couple. And so there's always new content over there for you to check out related to TCU athletics, and I hope that you will do that. Frogs Insider is a part of Dave Campbell's Texas Football. We are on the Dave Campbell's College Podcast Network, the TCU representative. There is a podcast for all 13 D1 programs in the state of Texas. You can find that feed just by searching Dave Campbell's College Podcast. All you have to do is search that. You'll see our feed pop up. You won't see this show in that feed, because with 13 shows in one feed, plus the big show that they do over there with Mike Craven and Carter Yates, it's 14 episodes a week if everybody just does one. So we only include our Sunday night episodes in that feed. If you want this show, you've probably already found the feed that it exists in. You just search Frogs Insider. You get this show, you get the big Sunday show, and you also get Melissa's game previews from the other sideline, her interview with beat writers from the teams that TCU is facing in upcoming weeks. Hers with Colorado's beat writer, Brian Harrell, I believe his last name is. Fantastic guy. We've known him for a while. Melissa's done a couple preview shows with him in the past for the 2023 game. Brought him back on this year to preview Colorado again. It's a great interview. That'll be up in the feed later this week. That's everywhere you get your Frogs Insider podcast feeds. But that's enough. That's 5 minutes of just me rambling on about content. And so let's get into some actual content here. First and foremost, I had someone on Twitter reach out to me. I didn't call for questions this week, but I'm going to pull this up as I vamp. Someone tweeted at me and said, hey, would love it if you would talk about this on the next Indy Drill. And so we're going to do that. Let's see. Let's scroll. Let's scroll here. We're almost there, I promise. We're almost there. Here it is. Mando Frog tweeted and said, mailbag for the Indy show, but is it time to have a serious conversation about the O-line coaching position? If we aren't shopping for 4- and 5-star O-line talent, we need a coach who can produce. I'd recommend Brian Ferentz. Okay, there's a lot to break down in this comment. And I understand fans' frustration with the offensive line coach at this point. The offensive line was terrible on Friday. I think we all witnessed basically the same thing. If you went and saw my snap count article over at hornfrogblitz.com, you saw all the PFF grades for the offensive linemen. They weren't good. They weren't good in hardly any capacity. The pass protection from the tackles was exceptionally bad. Pass protection from the running backs was exceptionally bad. And Josh Hoover wasn't very good himself either. Obviously, he was under duress. Also made some pretty big mistakes in that football game. But Steven and I got into this a little bit on the live post-game show, and I want to revisit this topic in more depth and detail with Jeremy Clark when he and I get a chance. He and I have already talked about doing a collaborative episode where we talk about recruiting. I know he got into it a little bit with Jeff on their show this week, but I think that there are a couple of ways to dissect how TCU is approaching recruiting and how that impacts offensive line play at times. First and foremost, it is very clear at this point that TCU wants to be a developmental school. And that means that they want to commit to having a roster that they've mostly recruited out of high school and developed into talent that can produce positive results at the P4 level. We've seen that in a couple areas, right? Josh Hoover is the prime example of a guy that committed here out of high school, waited his turn, and is now, for the most part, producing at an extremely high level for this football team. Marcus Deal is another example on the defensive side of the thing. Bud Clark is another example, although he was here prior to Sonny. There are examples kind of up and down the line of these guys that have been here and have produced well. The reality is, though, and this is something that I think makes that plan challenging to an extent, is there's also, I think, a hesitancy to commit big dollars to high school recruits. And Sonny said this on record before multiple times, that he would prefer to spend his money on veteran talent that has been on campus and been developed, or if you have to fill a need really quickly, going and getting someone in the portal and letting the bulk of your rev share dollars going to those players rather than paying a bunch of money for high school kids who haven't shown that they can play at the college level yet. And I understand that to an extent. I also think that paying high school players and being a developmental program aren't necessarily mutually exclusive ideas or concepts. I think that they can play off each other. And frankly, I think they'd play off each other really well if there was a slight shift, maybe not to only paying exorbitant amount of money to high school recruits so that you have like a top 10 class and look at us, we've got a top 10 class and all this other stuff. But if you selectively and trusting your evaluation say, we haven't recruited a blue chip offensive lineman since we've been here, if we're talking about the Sonny Dykes coaching staff. There are zero blue chip offensive linemen that have been recruited to TCU out of high school currently on the roster. What if you make a commitment to going and getting one or two, preferably tackles, invest that money, not overwhelmingly, but intentionally in a specific direction? You can still be a developmental school. You would just be developing higher rated prospects. And I know that there's always been this incredible tension with TCU's fan base and rankings, star ratings on recruiting sites, because the previous administration, if you'll call it that, Gary's staff, was very good at identifying talent, very good at finding diamonds in the rough. The list is as long as you can possibly imagine of guys who were overlooked in high school who found success at TCU. His ability to do that, Gary's ability to do that, is one of the reasons that TCU is where it is today. But I got to say this. The emergence of more recruiting sites, more talent evaluators, the growth of social media, the net being cast by schools now is so much deeper and wider that those margins for finding hidden talent have almost virtually gone away. The margins are so much thinner now in that area than they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I think one of the reasons we saw recruiting at the end of the Patterson era start to decline is because those margins got much smaller. I also think that when you want to be a developmental program in this day and age, it becomes much more challenging if you aren't competing for top talent out of high school. I think two things can come from TCU investing a little bit differently in high school recruiting, specifically in the trenches. The first is you get, I hate saying more talented, because that's not always necessarily the case. But the reality is blue chip recruits are blue chip for a reason, and they mostly pan out. If you are making a conscious effort to go and get blue chip recruits out of high school on both sides of the line of scrimmage, offensive line and defensive line. You can focus on one or the other if you'd like. TCU has had more success recruiting blue chip defensive linemen in the last 4 years than offensive linemen. But if you make an intentional effort to go and get those kids and recruit from the trenches outward at the high school level, you benefit in two ways. First of all, the level of talent that you're bringing in, the floor rises. Okay. Floor rises. And if you get them in from high school, you're more likely, in my opinion, to be able to sign them long term than if you have to wait and hope that someone of value hits the portal that you can afford. The likelihood is that you are going to keep a player for less than you have to spend to go and get a player. And so in my mind, and I don't mean this for every single position, but when it comes to the trenches, I think that there would be value in investing a little bit more money in high school offensive linemen that are blue chip prospects. That doesn't mean you have to go out and buy 5 every year, but one, right? 1 or 2. That reduces the overall number of offensive linemen you have to recruit. And I know that there's been a volume versus talent issue, quality versus quantity conversation when it comes to offensive line recruiting at TCU. Melissa and I have talked about it on the show before. But I just truly think that you can be a developmental program. You can go and get blue chip talent on the offensive line, and your ceiling will rise, but your floor will also rise. And I don't think we'll see situations like we saw with TCU on Friday night where you just didn't have an answer because you didn't have a person on the sideline who could go and stop Prince Dorba, right? So I wonder if we're going to continue having larger conversations about this. I want to sit Jeremy down and have this conversation with him specifically, but I think that there are ways to address some of the consistent weaknesses, less strong areas of the roster without abandoning the overall philosophy that Sonny has employed. Because I think Sonny's got the right philosophy. I think at the end of the day, you will be a more consistent football team if you are a developmental football team, if you keep your roster intact year over year, than if you're cycling out transfer portal kids every year. But I also think that the best programs in the country are being developmental with the best talent coming out of high school. So go get some of the best talent coming out of high school. I don't think that will. Now, I haven't seen their budgets. I don't know how much they're investing. I don't know. There are a lot of holes in this argument for sure, especially financial ones. But I can envision a world where they can fully live into the philosophy they currently have and still go and compete for top end talent in high school. We'll see. Again, I want to sit down with Jeremy and talk about this because he's obviously the longtime veteran when it comes to this kind of stuff. But those are just kind of penny for your thoughts from me on that topic. So shout out to Mondo Frog. Brian Ferentz, though, my brother, go get some help. Come on now. Let's not get ridiculous here. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit in the coaching carousel section of the show, but I just don't see the value in moving on from a position coach in the middle of the season. But we'll talk about the difference between that and a head coach when we move on down the line here in a little bit. But for now, let's go ahead and jump into our first conversation of the show, and that is the Score Act. It gets a competitor or a little brother or whatever you want to call it. For those that don't know what the Score Act is, a quick refresher. The Score Act is a piece of legislation currently sitting in the House of Representatives that is designed to provide some guardrails and some federal smoothness, I guess, some federal consistency to a lot of the issues that college athletics is currently facing, namely state level NIL regulations that are inconsistent at best from state to state. The Score Act would federalize a lot of those rules. Another thing being it would create a registrar or registration process for agents and some guardrails and requirements about being an agent at the collegiate level. It would provide some measures of safety for student athletes when it comes to medical care. And it would do a couple of, it would give a big antitrust exemption to the NCAA that would allow the NCAA to relitigate some of the lawsuits they've lost as far as student athletes' ability to earn money from name, image, and likeness and revenue sharing, and resolve some of the NCAA's eligibility challenges that they've been seeing lately. They've lost a couple lawsuits, most notably the Diego Pavia lawsuit that allowed JUCO players to reclaim those years they spent in JUCO at the D1 level. It's why Nnamdi Obiizor is still on the team for TCU this year. It's why Cole Kramer on the baseball team is coming back for TCU this year. The NCAA will be able to overturn some of those lawsuits that they've lost and reestablish some of the guardrails for eligibility and student athlete pay that they've lost in recent years. Think about that what you will. Personally, I think that's not a good thing because I think we've seen over time when the NCAA gets a little bit of power, they tend to not use it very well and definitely not use it in favor of student athletes. So that's the Score Act. It didn't come to a vote in September like first anticipated because there were some big challenges to it, both in the House of Representatives and out, namely billionaire Board of Regents member and booster for Texas Tech, Cody Campbell, ran a bunch of commercials openly speaking out against the SCORE Act and speaking out against giving antitrust to the NCAA. He flipped a bunch of Republicans from the state of Texas that are in the House, and it caused a lot of problems for this legislation. It hasn't been brought to a vote yet, but an update on that. One of the big groups of legislators that were against the SCORE Act is the Congressional Black Caucus. The Congressional Black Caucus is made up of 59 Democratic members of both the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate. And it is a key block of voters who have been against the SCORE Act, which long name, Student Compensation and Opportunity Through Rights and Endorsements Act, because it didn't go far enough, in their opinion, to protect the rights of student athletes. It gave too much power to the NCAA. And so there have been some negotiations happening on the Hill, happening in Washington, D.C., around how they can make adjustments to this bill so that it would be more amenable, maybe gain some votes from the Congressional Black Caucus. They've had 4 major areas of concern. 2 of those Republicans who have helped draft the bill have started to come around on and make some changes to, including extending the bill's medical provision that would require schools to pay for medical care beyond graduation for student athletes. The bill currently would allow for 3 years of that post-graduation health care. The Congressional Black Caucus has successfully lobbied for that to be extended to 5 years. And then another aspect of the bill gives student athletes representation on NCAA governance committees. Currently, they would be allowed to be 25% of that committee, and the Congressional Black Caucus has lobbied that successfully to go up to 35%. So instead of a quarter of a committee for governance being student athletes, a third essentially would be student athletes, a little bit more than that. And I think that would go a long way to allowing student athletes to protect their own rights in some of these governance conversations that the NCAA is having. So there's still a long way to go for the SCORE Act, but there is some movement happening on the Hill to try and get that bill to a place where it can be put up for a vote in the House. While that's happening, though, just this week, some senators have proposed their own piece of legislation, their own bill, and it includes something that we talked about a lot on the last episode, the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961. So jumping into this, the SAFE Act, which I believe is the Student Athlete Fairness and Enforcement Act, is another piece of legislation that is now going to be discussed, bandied around. I will say this for the SAFE Act. I think some of the legislation in it is very good, but it does not have bipartisan support yet like the SCORE Act does in the House. And that's going to go a long way to making it, it's just going to make it really difficult for anything to actually happen with the SAFE Act at this point. But here are 10 items from the SAFE Act, the little brother to the SCORE Act. SAFE Act, keep it in your brain. SAFE Act is Senate, SCORE Act is House. We are currently talking about the SAFE Act in the Senate that came out this week. There are 10 items in this bill. I'm just going to read them to you, and then I'll tell you what I think about them after that. Number 1, it will create federal rights around name, image, and likeness, replacing state laws with a strong national NIL standard. It guarantees a couple things. It guarantees 10-year scholarship for Division I schools. That includes 5 years of post-eligibility medical coverage for sport-related injuries, safety standards for all kinds of injuries and risks related to playing college sports. It would require specific contracts for NIL that protect student athletes. including key terms like what the athlete must do under the contract and how much they will be paid, because believe it or not, some of these contracts don't have that stuff. It will provide endorsement rights for student athletes so that a school cannot restrict an athlete's NIL endorsement deals except during organized team activities. So for that one, think about Cooper Flagg for Duke last year. He's a Nike athlete, right? But Duke is an Adidas school. So when he's on the court, no, sorry, he's a New Balance athlete. Something along those lines. His personal endorsement was not the same brand as Duke. And so when he was playing for Duke, he was wearing Duke affiliated clothing and shoes and all that stuff. But when he was doing his commercials or when he was out and about doing photo shoots, whatever, he was wearing his endorsement deal stuff. This would provide more protections for that. It would provide whistleblower protections for those who report violations, and it would create another office at the NCAA to help them resolve disputes with schools and conferences. That's all in the first bullet point. The National Rights and Protections for Student Athletes. It's what they're calling it. The second one, and if you listen to the last episode, this will be interesting to you. Your ears will perk up. Your eyes might get a little big. The second thing that the SAFE Act would do is allow the pooling of media rights to maximize revenue. Can anyone say Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961? This would be the antitrust exemption that would allow schools and conferences to come together and pool their media rights so that it wouldn't necessarily have to be Big Ten versus SEC, ACC versus Big 12, but the Power Four conferences could come together and sell their media rights as a group and potentially make 2, 3, 4 times as much as they're making right now. I talked a lot about the amendment to the Sports Broadcasting Act in the last episode. I would say I would rehash it all here, but it would take like 30 more minutes. So I will link to that episode in the show notes for this one if you missed out on that episode. But there's a lot going on with the Sports Broadcasting Act. There's a lot going on with Cody Campbell in that act. There's some tension around amending that act. The SAFE Act in the Senate very explicitly creates an antitrust exemption for college athletics to pool their media rights. And that is a big, big deal. Huge, huge, huge deal. The third thing, new broadcast rights to bolster Olympic and women's sports. So going back to the last episode again, my big question for Cody Campbell's pie in the sky dream scenario of protecting Olympic sports and women's rights through this antitrust exemption that would give schools and conferences more money. The question being, would that money actually make it to women's sports and Olympic sports? The SAFE Act guarantees that it would by saying schools must use the increased media rights revenue to retain the same number of scholarships and roster spots for non-revenue generating and women's sports as provided during the 2023 and 2024 academic school year. So schools would not be able to cut sports that weren't making money and funnel all of the new TV revenue money into football and basketball and baseball. So this provides some protections that Cody Campbell has said publicly that he really wants for Olympic sports and women's sports. Number 4, market level broadcast access for football and basketball rights. So this would make college sports, specifically football and basketball, far more similar to the NFL, that content be made available for each college athletic competition for football and basketball on a non-exclusive basis for not less than one local outlet. So think about how the NFL works, right? You have your national broadcasts and you have your local broadcasts. It's how they divide up all of these games. Sometimes those games are not on the same network, right? This would essentially provide the same opportunities for college football and college basketball, where, in the NFL, we see, okay, well, this is America's national game of the week, but while that's going on, there are 3 other games that are happening locally, broadcast on subsidiaries. You'd be able to see some of that in college athletics as well. You'd also see, as an extension of this, the fifth point in the SAFE Act, which is streaming media utilization rights. This would require broadcast networks, streaming media platforms, and other distributors who control streaming media rights to reconvey those rights back to the schools if they don't use or underutilize the streaming media rights. So essentially, say that there's a conference out there or a school out there who, doesn't always get their product on a national linear channel, and sometimes it doesn't end up on, ESPN Plus. It might be on Paramount. This would give the rights back to the schools to be able to provide their own broadcast to their fan base. Or it would allow non-revenue sports or women's sports that don't ever end up on a streaming platform, say, TCU beach volleyball, when it's not, a national championship. TCU would be able to broadcast those non-rev sports through their own means, through streaming. Have you ever thought, hey, I'd love to tune in on a men's tennis match or beach volleyball, or checking on the equestrian team to see how they're doing? This would give TCU the opportunity to stream those more regularly because they aren't streamed right now. In fact, if you think about TCU specifically, I know we're trying to broaden the lens here, but TCU specifically as an example, there are only 6 programs of the 16 at TCU that are actually included in their TV media rights with the Big 12. You know which 6 they are? Football, basketball, baseball, obviously men's basketball, women's basketball, volleyball, and soccer. Those are the only 6. So if I didn't name your favorite sport at TCU, they are not technically a part of the revenue that TCU brings in from TV rights every year. The SAFE Act would allow TCU, the university, to stream those independently of its media rights contract. Interesting stuff. The last 5, let's start with number 6. This is a piece of the legislation that I think is very similar to the SCORE Act, and that is cracking down on bad actor agents. So there are no regulations for agents at the collegiate level right now, or minimal ones. And we're seeing agents take advantage of a lot of student athletes who don't have strong support systems, who don't fully understand some of the things that are being put in their contracts. An example I gave on the last episode was there's a kid out there who I know for a fact, not at TCU, but somewhere else, has signed a contract that not only guarantees the agent 20% of all of that student athlete's earnings while they're an undergrad, but also commits 5% of any professional earnings that student athlete may ever make to this agent. Like, can you imagine? That's ridiculous. So the crackdown on agents in this SAFE Act does a couple of different things. First of all, it requires agents to be registered with the state and certified at the NCAA that they are registered before they can represent any student athletes. The second thing it does is it caps agent fees at 5%. Right now, like I said, we're seeing up to 20, 25, 30% agent fees. That's ridiculous. And we're going to get into another way we're seeing that happen later in the show when we talk about Blueprint Sports. It's going to prohibit agents from making fraudulent statements in their registration. Can't lie. Shocker. And it's going to keep agents from misrepresenting their NIL deals to get student athletes to enroll in a specific school or hit the portal in a specific way. Athletes will have a private right of action to enforce their NIL rights and bring cases in court against agents who attempt to do these things. Number 7, brings certainty to the transfer portal. And the way that they say that it would do that is setting a national standard for student athlete transfers. Student athletes can transfer twice without having to sit out for a year. And student athletes can transfer without having to sit out for a year if their sport is cut or materially reduced. So if a school does impact the scholarship count, that would be another situation where a student athlete can transfer without having to sit. The coaches being fired and all that kind of stuff would still count as well. But you can see that they're putting a cap on the number of times you can transfer without having to sit out a year at 2. with a third maybe exception if your sport gets cut at your school. Um, we've had a lot of conversations over the years on the show about the number of times you can transfer. We've got guys and gals at their fourth school in 4 years. How much does that hurt their development? How much does that hurt their academic learning? This would cap some of that a little bit. Number 8, it would require transparency for NIL deals between collectives and student athletes. Going back to the College Sports Commission that just got founded, this reinforce their valid business purpose, that it has to be related to promotion or endorsement of actual goods and services, and that the compensation must be at rates and terms commensurate with what other individuals would be paid. So that market value has to be for promotion or an endorsement, aka a valid business purpose. So we've seen the College Sports Commission kind of start to work in that way a little bit already. The SAFE Act simply reinforces that. Number 9, it preserves the Grant House versus NCAA settlement, 22% revenue share cap. So essentially this is saying, hey, that settlement that's already in place from House versus NCAA, we're just solidifying that. We're not touching that. We're not doing anything else with that. This bill leaves it in place, essentially. It respects that agreement between the NCAA and the student athletes regarding that revenue share cap. Just kind of puts it in stone that is law now. And then the last thing, it talks about enforcement. And it establishes tools for the Federal Trade Commission and for state attorneys general to sue and get first-time civil penalties for violations of athlete NIL rights. You can sue agents and collectives. The act would grant state attorneys general authority to enforce federal law in court, including against agents and collectives. It would give athletes a private right of action to enforce their NIL rights and bring cases in court against bad actor agents. So this would just essentially solidify a student athlete's autonomy, ability, power, however you want to say it, to stand up for themselves against institutions, organizations, or agents that would otherwise take advantage of them. So it's really just a protection for student athletes to be able to do what we've seen them doing for the last couple of years, which is filing lawsuits to try and gain more access to rev share and NIL, gain more access to eligibility. This would preserve a student athlete's ability to do that, their right to do that. Whereas in the SCORE Act, we see some of that stripped away with the antitrust exemption given to the NCAA. So you can see kind of the two differences here. I will say, without bipartisan support in the Senate, it doesn't feel like the SAFE Act will get very far, but it's only been circulating in the public for a couple of days now, so I would give it some time to stew and to resonate, because the SCORE Act didn't have bipartisan support right out of the gate either, or not at least not a ton of it. And we've seen it gain a lot of steam. I'll be really interested to see how the House and the Senate kind of resolve the differences in these two bills, if they choose to go that route, if they just choose to pluck some of the things from the SAFE Act and put it in the SCORE Act because that thing's already further along and has bipartisan support. I don't really know where they go from here, but what I will say is the fact that the SAFE Act does two things, to me, makes it the more appealing bill at this point. Those things being the change to the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961, allowing schools and conferences to pool their media rights, and the fact that it protects Olympic sports and women's sports in a revenue-centric way in the legislation of the bill, in the actual language of the bill. I think those are two things that help make what we were talking about last episode with Cody Campbell's kind of pie in the sky idyllic version of college athletics. It helps make that more of a reality. It protects women's sports, protects Olympic sports. It allows schools and conferences to make even more money on their revenue rights. It protects student athlete rights, and it holds bad actors that are agents to account. And I think all of those things are really good. I think a lot of the SCORE Act is really good as well. I think at the end of the day, we're talking about a piece of legislation in the House and a piece of legislation in the Senate that both have really good bones. You've just got to figure out which skeleton you want to add some meat to. You add some flesh to at this point, right? My sense is that it will probably end up still being the SCORE Act, but the SAFE Act has a lot of, I think, really strong uh, pieces to it. And so we'll see. The fact that the Congressional Black Caucus and Republicans in the House have made some headway on the SCORE Act kind of makes me think that that's where we're still going to end up. But the SAFE Act is intriguing, no doubt, because it includes some of the stuff that we talked about last week that would really strengthen student athletes' footing and schools and conferences' ability to negotiate media rights. I think it would allow a lot more schools to still be included in what's ever next. And I think that that's a good thing at the end of the day. Okay, that was a lot. Holy crap, we're already at 40 minutes on this episode. I'm going to freak out. We are going to take a quick break, and then I will be back to talk about the College Sports Commission's snitch line. Okay, crossing off the SCORE Act and that conversation. It was a good one, though. I would love to hear from y'all what you think about the SCORE Act, the SAFE Act. Tweet it at me, comment on the show in the podcast feed or on YouTube. I'll keep the conversation going wherever you guys engage because I'm so interested in this stuff and I want to hear what y'all think about it. Which one do you think is in better shape right now as far as actual content of the bill? Let me know. SCORE or SAFE. But moving on. So the College Sports Commission was the independent commission created by the NCAA when the settlement went into effect on July 1st to regulate and approve name, image, and likeness deals with third parties and student athletes. The way that it does this is in contract with Deloitte. They review every single NIL deal that's valued at over $600 to make sure that it has a valid business purpose. We just talked about that. Clear terms and clear deliverables for the student athlete, and then also clear pay. The way that they are doing this is through a software, I guess you can call it, called NIL Go. So essentially, the student athlete has to submit any potential contract with a third-party NIL institution that can include collectives. They submit it through NIL Go. The College Sports Commission, also known as the CSC, reviews it and either approves it or rejects it and makes recommendations for resubmission. So, hey, we're not going to approve it this time around, but if you change this, this, and this, resubmit it, it'll probably be good to go. But now, this is very interesting. And shout out to Amanda Cernovich because she's been on Amanda Kristovich. She's been on an absolute heater over at Front Office Sports over the last couple of weeks. She reported on Tuesday of this week that the CSC is setting up a phone line, an anonymous reporting tip line, to share information about NIL rules violations across Division I college sports. So essentially, and some people in the industry, according to Amanda, are calling this a snitch line. So essentially, you can call in and anonymously report that so-and-so has an illegal NIL deal. They haven't submitted it to NIL Go. They're making this much money, blah, blah, blah. You got to investigate. I just can't even imagine the value of something like that. Like, in the grand scheme of everything that's going on in college athletics right now, I guess you could say, oh, hey, this collective's actually shelling out $1 million to this guy, but the deal they put in NIL Go is only for $5,000. Please do something about this. Like, I can see where maybe there's value in that regard, but an anonymous snitch line just leaves the door open to, I don't know. If the number ever gets out, it's gonna be a lot of trouble. It's gonna be a lot of trouble. Yeah, I don't know. This is a shorter segment of the show. Maybe we're gonna make up some time here. I just don't see how. I just don't see any kind of actionable intel that would come from something like this? An anonymous tip line? Like, how are you going to go about investigating that? Hey, Texas A&M Collective, did you do this? Nope. Oh, okay. Like, what are we doing? Now, there are some other problems with NIL Go, and I will stop down for just a second to talk about this because there are a host of guys who have and gals who have been waiting for weeks and weeks and weeks to get their contracts approved because it appears as if the College Sports Commission is manually approving every contract. That part makes sense in my brain, but also like, did you not hire enough people to get through these things quickly? Like, what are we doing? Why are we making kids have to wait a month to get a contract approved? And some players have lost out on opportunities as a result because it had to be done by a certain date because there was a certain event tied to it for a promotion or something like that, and the contract didn't get approved until after the event already took place. And so now you're talking about a kid losing out on money because of the CSC instead of earning money because of the CSC. They got other problems, I think, to figure out before they go around with the snitch line trying to catch people doing bad things. At some point, there does need to be good enforcement. There needs to be a way to do like some reporting in that way. But can we figure out the basics of this thing first before we go around trying to get people telling on each other? Like, get the kids their money first and foremost. That's your job. And then move on to other things. Okay, that was a quick one. We're going to keep on moving down this road with two new Big 12 partnerships. The Big 12 announced earlier this week that they have signed deals with New Era and Rally House. New Era being the like Jesus hat people. Great description there. It's late at night, guys. I've been talking for a long time already. Hey, New Era is a baseball cap manufacturer. They have signed a deal with the Big 12 and Rally House, the merch store that sells shirts, hats, jerseys, all the trinkets, all the other stuff. You've probably seen them around. They have signed a partnership deal with the Big 12 as well. And I'm trying to find the announcement. Here it is. Big 12 partners with Rally House and New Era Cap to expand apparel and championship merchandise offerings. So think back to the last two deals that the Big 12 signed. The Big 12 deals with Allstate and PayPal Venmo. The Venmo PayPal partnership was around structure and organization and helping make rev share payments, right? And they've got some deliverables as well as far as signage goes at certain events. Allstate's was around being the title sponsor for all Olympic sports championships, some other stuff as well, including Big 12 Pro Day, and then some other signage and whatnot. Now, these are two more deals that have very specific assets to them. Rally House, first of all, will serve as the official e-commerce platform and official brick and mortar fan shop for the Big 12 conference. Big 12 merchandise will be available across Rally House's 300 plus locations in 26 states, while also serving as activation sites for future Big 12 commercial partnerships and ticketing initiatives. New Era, meanwhile, will become the official championship headwear and apparel partner of the Big 12, with its branding featured all across Big 12 championships, including LED signage, Big 12 Studios content, Big 12 radio on TuneIn, and as a league sponsor, it will be the presenting partner of Big 12 basketball media days. So, if you've been keeping up with some of these partnerships, we talked about the Allstate one and the PayPal one a couple episodes ago here. I also wrote for a publication called NIL Wire a breakdown of the Allstate partnership and some other notes that added context to it. Here's where the Big 12 is right now. The Big 12 is trying to stack partnerships in order to close the financial gap with the Big 10 and the SEC. That makes sense. The PayPal partnership, which is a 5-year deal, has been valued, reported at around, I believe, just under $100 million with the Big 12 for that 5-year deal. So roughly a little less than $20 million annual to the conference. I had a conversation with a couple of folks over the last few weeks about the possible valuation of the All-State deal. My understanding is that deal is somewhere around 3 to 4 years, up to about $10 million. So another $30 to $40 million for the title rights to some of these Olympic sports championships. So really over the next 5 years, it's $140 million coming into the Big 12 just from those two partnerships alone. Now, for the longest time, the Big 12's title partner for the football championship has been what? It's been Dr. Pepper. Well, they are no longer the title sponsor for the Big 12's football championship. That ended in 2024. They are still doing Dr. Pepper is their halftime, throw the football through the hole to earn scholarship money, the $100,000 scholarship giveaways. That deal is no longer with the Big 12 as well. It will be continuing, though, with the SEC, the Big 10, and the ACC. So as of right now, the Big 12 is without a title sponsor for the football championship game. I think that changes pretty soon. I'm just going to say that. I'm going to leave that right there. But if you look at the larger plan of what the Big 12 is trying to do with its partnerships and its sponsorships, I think it's really smart. Because if you are trying as a league to make up $40 to $50 million per school, you're not going to be able to do that with one big partnership. You're going to have to stack some things. You're going to have to get multiple people to pay in, and they're showing that they're really being aggressive about that right now. And I think when we figure out who the title sponsor for football is, that's going to go a long way to helping close the gap a little bit as well. But I did have a couple conversations around partnerships and, how much of this money is actually making it to schools. And I think one of the big things to keep in mind here is that when the conference is cutting these deals, I would say 95% of that money is going to the schools. So if you think about, let's just for the sake of round numbers, say that 5-year PayPal deal is $100 million, so $20 million a year. And let's say that out of that, 5%, right? So 5 million goes to the Big 12 and 95 goes to the rest of the league. Well, that's roughly $4.5 million over 5 years to each school. That doesn't sound like a lot, but I'll tell you what it is. For those 5 years, it's essentially offsetting the money that schools are losing from the settlement back pay agreements, right? Where they have to pay former student athletes. That money is coming out of basketball TV revenue from the NCAA tournament that would normally get paid out to all the schools. And if you're a school that opted into the settlement, a portion of that revenue is going to be withheld to pay the back pay from the settlement. So a deal like the PayPal one says, hey, you're already having to deal with rev share. Now you're not losing another $1.5 million on top of that because of this deal. And that's just the first deal, right? So now you've got the All-State deal. You've got these deals with Rally House and New Era. Whenever you get the football deal, the title sponsor for the football deal is going to be a banger. It's probably going to be somewhere between $20 and $25 million of annual value, right? Then we're really starting to talk about cooking with gas and starting to see some real significant dollars going to each of the schools. So I think the Big 12's got a really good strategy. This is just another aspect of that strategy. And we're going to see a lot of different partnerships and title sponsors on a lot of different things, I think, before Brett Yormark and his folks over the Big 12 office are done. Because they are working really hard to close that gap any way they can. And they're being really aggressive about it. I think that's good. Other things to think about when it comes to partnerships and endorsements and those kinds of things. The NCAA recently lifted a rule about on-field sponsorships. I think we're going to start seeing some Big 12 schools drop announcements with on-field sponsors and partnerships like we've seen some other schools across the country do, South Carolina being one recently. For TCU fans who remember that their former athletic director is now there, South Carolina is one of the schools that has signed an on-field sponsorship agreement. So you'll see a logo on South Carolina's field this year. Another thing that's just been approved are the jersey patches, sponsorship patches on basketball jerseys, like we see in the NBA, where you have the one right there on that kind of shoulder chest area. We're going to start seeing, I think, either the conference level or school level, that patch being sold as well. One person that I talked to, I asked, are we going to be able, like, are we going to see, like, eventually will a college student athlete's jersey look like a Premier League jersey where they've got the school logo on the small patch and then the big logo is an endorsement deal like a title sponsor? Maybe. We're going to start seeing sleeve patches. We're going to see helmet ads on baseball and football. Are we going to see, like we already see the bowl patch, right? Are we going to see a sponsorship patch throughout the year on football jerseys? Really interesting future ahead for some other kind of sponsorship deals. And I'll be curious to see how schools negotiate those, how conferences negotiate those, so on and so forth. Okay. Let's take another quick break. I'm going to grab some water, and then we will keep on going with the coaching carousel and how that applies to TCU. Okay. There are currently 5 schools who know that they will have a new head coach in 2026 for the football season. Those 5 are Arkansas, Oklahoma State, Virginia Tech, UCLA, and Stanford. People are forgetting that Stanford fired their head coach back in the spring and hired Frank Reich as a interim before the season started. But there are 5 schools currently in the Power 4 that will be searching for a head coach this offseason. Arkansas, Oklahoma State, Virginia Tech, UCLA, and Stanford. Now, the question I've been getting quite frequently is TCU going to be impacted by these searches? Before we get into that, I want to talk about why is it September, or I guess October 1st, and we're already seeing 5 Power 4 jobs come open. Well, you can't wait around anymore because of the early signing period in December. We saw that happen with TCU's search back in 2021, right? You also have to be able to rally the troops and rally the donors and say, hey, we're not waiting around. Some of these opportunities, specifically I'm looking at Oklahoma State, you probably got to get ahead of it before some of the bigger jobs come open so that you can vet your candidates and have front runners and figure out who's reasonable and realistic before bigger jobs come open and all eyes turn in that direction. So that's why I think we've seen some of these jobs open up. UCLA and Virginia Tech, I think, fall in that same category. Even Arkansas, to an extent, falls in the same category when you think about the funding, the struggles that they've had with football over the last couple of years under Sam Pittman. Get ahead of it, right? Let people know you're available without having to back channel too much. Granted, all of these schools have already back channeled. And just get your ducks in a row before, God forbid, like Florida comes open, right? Because that creates a whole nother wave of problems for you if you're Oklahoma State and Arkansas, if you're having to battle that out with Florida. As far as Sam Pittman goes, guys, yes, he's a great offensive line coach. I know TCU's had some offensive line woes. We've already talked about it on this show. Get in line, right? I'll just say it as bluntly as I can. Get in line. There's going to be a long line of people who want Sam Pittman's services in one way or another. Get in line. Get in line. And be okay with where you are in line, because it's not going to be front. Okay? If they even choose to get in line, which they might not. But for those TCU fans that want Sam Pittman, think Sam Pittman's relationship with Kendall Briles is kind of like snap your fingers and he's here on Monday, get in line. Now, as far as TCU losing an assistant to one of these jobs, is there a possibility that Kendall Briles goes back to Arkansas? He was the offensive coordinator there for a couple of years before he came to TCU. Rumor has it he still really loves the school, has a great relationship with the school. I have not talked to Kendall about this. I have not asked him. I'm not doing that in the middle of the season. There's no shot that that's happening. I think it's uh, a little ridiculous to have to talk about it. But when jobs open in September, that's inevitable, right? It's part of the business, I guess. I would have a hard time seeing Arkansas go with a coordinator hiring a first time coach. Um, so there's that. I have less of a hard time seeing that with Oklahoma State. But really, where I think this coaching carousel this cycle could impact TCU is when some of these P4 schools start to make their hires, right? Because who are some of the names that have already started surfacing for a few of these jobs? You've got GJ Kinney at Texas State. You've got Jeff Traylor at UTSA. You've got Eric Morris, who has North Texas 5-0 right now and absolutely clicking on all cylinders on offense. Those are 3 jobs at the G5 level in the state of Texas that could see their head coach be somewhere else next year. And if I'm a G5 school in the state of Texas and I'm looking around at the landscape of coaches to hire, I think TCU's got a couple pretty good assistants that I might be interested in going after. Now, would those assistants take that job? I have no knowledge of that. But if I'm one of these schools, if I'm Texas State or UTSA or North Texas, I'm absolutely making that phone call because I've seen the results on the field and I like what I've seen, right? So I think if we're talking about how the coaching carousel impacts TCU this year, I think it's more in the secondary hires, second level of coaching hires, not necessarily the P4 school swoops in and takes your coordinator kind of situation, if that makes sense. Now, I could be totally wrong. I don't think I am. I could be. I would also be perfectly content to see TCU's coaching staff left intact this offseason and roll into 2026. But, that might not be reality. We'll just have to wait and see. For now, though, TCU fans should just be thankful because I think they've got 2 really, really good coordinators on both sides of the ball. And that's a testament to Sonny Dykes and his hiring practices and his ability to evaluate coaching talent. We've seen his coaching tree. It's solid. Look at the last 4 offensive coordinators he's had, right? They're very good. All 4 of them are very good and different. Yeah. So when it comes to the coaching carousel, I think TCU might be impacted. I think we'll see names come up in searches depending on who those first hires are, but I don't necessarily think much happens from that. TCU fans will continue to fret and sweat it out, though, because that's what TCU fans are really good at doing, reassurance or not. Okay, let's move on to our last subject of the day before we get into our picks, and that is Blueprint Sports and other third-party NIL organizations. So, for starters, Blueprint Sports and other organizations like Student Athlete NIL, known as SNIL, are essentially third-party operations machines for NIL collective groups, right? And so in the grand scheme of all of the things that an athletic department is in charge of, when you consider all of the extra money that schools have to spend on staffing and whatever else, including rev share now, sometimes for certain athletic departments, it makes more sense to hire a third party to manage some of the back end infrastructure of NIL collectives, like logistical support, all that kind of stuff. Blueprint Sports is one of those organizations. SNIL is one of those organizations, Student Athlete NIL. There are a handful of them that still operate as third-party kind of agencies to help schools with the NIL stuff. Now, Blueprint Sports is specific to basketball. They do a lot of roster consulting and valuations of players, both high school and portal, to help schools kind of identify players in their price range who can contribute in a real way at that level. It came out this week on Sportico by Daniel Libet, who reported that Blueprint has a new deal in place with Oregon State. And I thought it was really interesting, and that's why I wanted to talk about it because Oregon State is paying, I believe it's, let me find it, $284,000 annually to Oregon State's paying $284,000 annually to Blueprint, um, as essentially a management fee. And you would think that, okay, hey, we've paid you this management fee, and now you're going to do the management, right? You're going to do the logistical work that an NIL collective otherwise would do, or that we would otherwise have to staff internally and do. But that's not where the payments for Blueprint end. Blueprint has also negotiated with Oklahoma State a profit sharing arrangement based on certain fundraising goals for the university. So if I'm just going to read this from Daniel's article to make it as clear as possible. The OSU agreement calls for an annual management fee of about $284,000 by the school to Blueprint and a profit sharing arrangement based on a baseline fundraising target of $750,000 in year one, which increases 3% every year thereafter. The company, Blueprint, gets to keep 75% of net direct revenue between the baseline target and 1.15 million. That's that 750,000 and 1.15 million. Anything fundraised between those two numbers, Blueprint Sports gets 75% of it. Blueprint Sports also gets 50% of net direct revenue above 1.15 million. In addition, Blueprint is entitled to a contract administration fee of 1.25% of all NIL compensation it administers. So if you're keeping track, that is 4 different ways that Blueprint Sports is getting paid to help Oregon State with their NIL collective management. Now, if you think about the state of Oregon State right now, the situation they find themselves in, they are in a financial crisis of sorts because they just got booted out of the P5, right? They lost all of the great TV money that they were making with the Pac-12 and now are a G6 school essentially. So their finances are not where they were 3 or 4 years ago. They're really pinching pennies. If Blueprint generated $3 million of net direct revenue in a single year, it would receive a total payout, including management fee, fundraising bonus, and contract administration fee of $1,542,500. Let me read that again. If Blueprint generates $3 million of net direct revenue in a year, they keep over half of it. What? Are you for real? In what way does that benefit Oregon State? Now, yes, or you can say, well, Jamie, they get $1.46 million and they have someone else doing the work for them. Kind of. Yeah. I could see, like, here's my thing. I think that with the way college athletics is currently structured, there is room for reasonable third-party contracting to help when it would be more expensive to staff out a team to do that internally. That part makes sense to me. But I also know for a fact that there are so many people out there who could be teams of 1 or 2 doing this for simply the management fee of $300,000 a year, and they could consult perfectly capably with these schools and not fully take advantage of the lack of leverage that a university has, specifically one like Oregon State, which is already going through it. Now, if you're talking about an Ohio State or a Texas or an LSU, okay, right, sure, get your money, get your bag. But this feels kind of icky when we're talking about an Oregon State. And I went to Blueprint Sports website the other day when I read this article just to see some of the other schools that they're partnered with. Tell me if you think these schools are all in really good financial situations at this point. Hang on. Where did that whole list go? Oh, they've changed their website. Tricky, 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 tricky little boys. They have 5 schools currently listed on their website right now. They are Oregon State, Maryland, NC State, Arkansas, and Penn State. Now, I think that 2 of those 5 schools are in dramatically different financial situations than the 2 Big Ten schools and the SEC school listed there. They also do a lot of G5 work. They used to have some of those schools listed. They don't currently. I think that's an interesting little website change that I'm just now realizing live on air. All that to say, I think that if you're a third-party NIL organization, just be above board. Take your management fee and move along. Don't price gouge some of these schools that you can take advantage of just because you can. Feels a little shitty. Pardon my French. This is a family show. But yeah, so that's a red flag for me. Now, obviously, they still have to operate within NIL Go and the College Sports Commission and all of these other things. So they have to be, God, what is it? Valid business purposes, all the other language that we've talked about on the show before. Like they have to abide by all of that. But I find it hard to believe that that is a good deal for Oregon State. I find it very hard to believe that that is a good deal for Oregon State. Anywho, we've got some picks to make. I've already been talking for over an hour. So let's jump into some picks. Let's not be mad at Blueprint Sports anymore for a little bit. I'll go back to being mad at them after I make my picks and help you guys win some money, hopefully. So let's do that. Let's jump into some picks right now, starting with Cincinnati, again, hosting Iowa State. Saturday morning at 11 a.m. on ESPN2. Cincinnati is a 1.5-point favorite here, and you might be thinking to yourself, Jamie, why the hell is Cincinnati a 1.5-point favorite here? Yes, they just beat Kansas, but Iowa State has been like a wood chipper for most of the year. They've kind of been mowing people down. Well, Iowa State might be without both of their starting cornerbacks for this game. Both of those guys in the secondary got banged up, and Cincinnati has been able to throw the ball a little bit this year. Brendan Swarsby has been fine. He's been fine. How will he be against the backup cornerbacks for Iowa State? Probably fine. Probably pretty decent. And Iowa State, for as good as they've been on offense, I haven't been as impressed as I thought I might be with them this year. I still think Cincinnati getting points, even though this is a home game, feels a little extreme to me. So there might be some value. There might be some value in that Iowa State pick, especially if you can get it at plus 1.5. Or crazy. If the line even moves more towards Cincinnati, you can get Iowa State plus 2.5, plus 3. I'd be interested in that. Next game. The Fighting Chandler Morrises of Virginia head to Louisville, coming off of an upset of Florida State, 2:30 p.m. on ESPN2. Louisville is a touchdown favorite in this game. This is the Louisville that, correct me if I'm wrong, needed a comeback to beat Pitt. Am I right there? Let me double check that to make sure that I'm right there. Because I believe they played Pitt this weekend and didn't just handle business like you would have expected them to. Let's see. Louisville 34, Pittsburgh 27. Louisville had to score 14 points in the fourth quarter to come back and win this game. They were losing this game 26-17 at halftime. That team is supposed to be the team that has been putting up just insane offensive numbers and just took down Florida State. Louisville -7 feels like a lot. Give me Virginia +7 in that football game. Next, probably my game of the week. Vanderbilt traveling to Alabama. I flipped these on this one. 2:30 p.m. on ABC. Alabama's a 10.5 point favorite. Sure, they just beat Georgia. Sure, they did. But they always beat Georgia. And yeah, they owe Vandy after last year, but Vandy, I mean, looks legitimate. Vandy's been exercising some demons out there. They went on the road and beat South Carolina. They absolutely obliterated a Georgia State team, Georgia Southern, one of the two, that beat them last year. 10.5 is a lot of points, even at home if you're Alabama. Give me Vandy plus 10.5. Moving. Houston hosting number 11 Texas Tech, two 4-0 football teams. Tech coming off of a bye week. Houston struggling on the road with the aforementioned Oregon State. 6 p.m. on ESPN. Texas Tech 12.5 point favorites. I think this is another one of those games where if Tech can just really just take care of business here with ease, then they become even more the number one front runner clearing the field favorite in the Big 12. Because I think Houston's got some juice. Not a lot of juice, but that kind of juice that just makes you very competent. And you don't make a ton of mistakes. And I don't know, Houston, at Houston, it's probably going to be half, 2/3 Tech fans anyways, but still, I think Tech clears the 12.5, but I don't feel great about it. Last but not least, Florida State hosting Miami, coming off a loss. Miami looks like a wood chipper as well. 6:30 p.m. ABC, Miami minus 4.5. I think Miami clears that, and I think Miami clears that with ease. I do. I just realized now that I didn't put the TCU game on here. Give me the Frogs by 90. Come on now. What are we really doing? That's going to do it, though, for this episode of Frogs Insider Indy Drill. If you could, please leave a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. Like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Comment score or safe, depending on which piece of legislation you like more. And then tweet at me. If I said something wrong, if you have questions, just tweet at me. I'm at Frog Preacher on Twitter. You can find my writing over at hornfrogblitz.com. And you can see Melissa's preview of the Colorado game with the Colorado beat writer coming up in this feed, coming up on the YouTube channel in just a day or so after this episode. So keep it here at Frogs Insider. We got all the latest. We always will. Better than all the rest. What can I say? I'm done being humble. It's 11 o'clock at night. All right. We'll see y'all later. Go Frogs.